Want to earn 20 grand from your backyard while only working 10 hours a week? Watch till the end of this video for my full step-by-step process on how to make that happen. I'm Zach Buckle, and I'm a year-round veggie farmer in Cody, Wyoming. And just last year, we were able to sell $85,000 of food from this tiny half-acre plot of land. Step one is to pick a 7,000 to 10,000 square foot space on your land and turn it into no-dig garden beds. So what you see behind me is about 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, and you need to set up 32 50 by 2.5 foot wide garden beds in no-dig style. So in order to do that, you basically lay cardboard on that entire footprint or builder's paper, 6 inches of compost in your growing beds, and 6 inches of wood chips in your pathways. And you need to set up a 3 foot wide perimeter around that whole space so you have some barrier between your growing space and the native plants next door. And here's what that looks like on my farm. So right behind me, you see 32 50-foot beds. And this is what we use to grow 2 crops a year. And here's what a no-dig version of this would look like. So here, these 3 25-foot beds are what I mean by no-dig style. What we did was we laid out cardboard on this small footprint, and then we layered 6 inches of compost in these growing beds, which is what you see here, and then 6 inches of wood chips in the pathways, which is what you see here. And then on the sides, we have a perimeter to give us a little bit of barrier between the growing space and the grass and weeds that are growing right outside of that. So it's literally that simple. That's how you can turn lawn space or just bare land into growing space and plant into it right away. If you're interested in a free PDF document that can guide you step by step on just the no-dig garden setup, I have a free backyard farm launch guide that you can get at the link in the description, where you will get emailed to you a PDF step-by-step of how to accomplish this in your garden or backyard. And it tells you everything you need to know from start to finish, and where to buy materials, how to acquire materials, how to buy the right amount of materials, and set this up so you can start growing in your backyard and making money right away. So if you're interested in that, click the link in the description below that says free backyard farm launchpad, and you'll get it sent to your email right away. If any of you have experience setting up a deep mulch no-dig garden like this in your backyard, comment below and share your experience, because it'll help those who are watching who have never done that before and encourage them to do it in their own backyard. Now that you've done the hard part, the rest is a lot easier. So step 2 is to set up 8 wobbler sprinklers like you see behind me in 25-foot length sections. So what you see behind me is 4 wobbler sprinklers in line with 25-foot length hoses in between. And then we have another long length of those sprinklers right next to me here. So we have a grand total of 8 wobbler sprinklers to irrigate these 32 50-foot beds. And then you're gonna wanna do this. Once you've got your sprinklers set up, you're gonna wanna set up a manifold at your water source, which looks something like this, where you can divert the water into sections. So here we've got a manifold for 1 line of hose. This will connect to 4 wobbler sprinklers in that system that I can turn on and off. And then this one goes to the other 4. So you can water half of the plot at once and not have to irrigate everything at once, which is handy for people that have low amounts of water coming from their water source, where they can't pump enough water at once to water the whole section. So a manifold like this is really handy for dividing up your water so you're not irrigating all at once. And the link for the wobbler sprinklers for you to purchase is at the link in the description below, or you can make your own, but I highly recommend you just buy those kits because it makes it a lot easier and it costs just about the same amount of money. And if you want to get really fancy and cut your time commitment down even more, you could set up a 2-zone water timer like this Rain Point 2-zone water timer, which is also linked in the description below. And you could set up to irrigate your land without you having to turn your hydrants on and off all the time. And you can set it up so you can literally have your crops being irrigated while you're on vacation. So this is a really handy tool to lower your time commitment every week, just setting up a simple water timer like this. Step 3 is to plant every one of those 32 50-foot beds in the spring with a high value, high profit crop according to your average last frost date. And you can do this in stages. You don't have to plant them all at once, but you're gonna want to plant them according to your last frost date, whether it's a certain amount of weeks before or a certain amount of weeks after, and break it up into bite-sized pieces so you're not doing all of the work at once. So in July, or 60 days after your average last frost, it should look something like what you see behind me, filled with almost mature vegetables for you to sell. And if you want a list of my favorite high profit crops, click the link in the description. The list will include your average yields on a 25-foot bed, which you can multiply by 2 for a 50-foot bed of all my favorite high value crops. It will include the average price that you can get at a farmer's market and the revenue that will be created by growing and selling that one crop. And ideally, you can do a lot of this with a push seeder like the Jang single row push seeder, which is what I use on my farm, or even an earthway push seeder, which I'll link in the description below, which will make planting those 32 beds really easy when you first start out. And ideally, you also have some sort of indoor grow light setup, which I have a kit that you could start growing plants inside at the link in the description below, where you can start plants inside and make it even easier to produce multiple crops in your season by growing plants that are halfway grown and transplanting them, because that is one way to really increase your yields on a small land base. So if you have the ability to start plants inside, certain crops like kale, lettuce, and a lot of the crops that you see behind me do really well by starting them ahead of time in your house, way before your average last frost, so you get a head start on your growing season. But even if you don't have that, it's not 100% necessary. Just a Jang or an earthway push seeder are gonna make it really easy to plant those 32 50-foot beds and not spend your entire weekend doing it. And your weekly work time will be broken up by season and look something like this. In spring, you're gonna be spending between 5 and 10 hours a week planting using something like the Jang seeder here, and cultivating in between your crops that you've planted to keep the weeds down using a tool, something like this collinear hoe here or a stirrup hoe. In the summer, you're gonna spend between 10, maybe up to 15 hours a week harvesting and selling your crops. Selling your crops at a farmer's market is somewhere between 4 and 6 hours a week. And then you'll probably have to spend about 5 to 8 hours harvesting and washing and packing all of those vegetables in order to make them sellable. So that's the summer workload. And then in the fall, you're basically just continuing to plant for fall harvest, which will be somewhere around the neighborhood of 10 hours a week. And you're gonna be just harvesting and selling again into the fall. But there's a lot less work involved in the fall because you're basically just gonna be harvesting. The planting for second crop for fall harvest happens mostly in the middle of the summer. And once you're done with that, all you're doing is harvesting and selling at a farmer's market. So the workload starts to go down less and less as you get later on into your growing season. And if you're able to push into your winter, depending on your climate, your workload goes down even more to about 5 to 8 hours a week, because you are literally just going to be harvesting and selling. So there won't be any more planting, cultivating, or amending beds. You're just going to be harvesting and selling your crops. Step 4 is what I call bed flipping on the farm. So every time you completely harvest one of those spring crops that you planted and sell it all, what you're going to want to do is immediately replant to another crop that will mature to a full crop in your growing season. And in order to do that easily, you're going to want to use a resource like my free annual planting schedule at the link in the description below that you can customize to your climate and plug in your planting dates and just check that and see if whatever crop you want to plant has time to mature in your season, and you should be able to immediately replant after your first spring crop. And in order to flip the beds, you may have to rip out the previous residue of the crop before, which does take some work. But if you're growing something like carrots or radishes or any root crops, after you've harvested that entire bed, you don't have to do any more work. You could plant immediately into that space. But for certain crops like tomatoes, and you want to plant a crop afterwards, you will have to rip them out and then plant again. So what you see behind me is our third crop of the year in this greenhouse, because in a greenhouse you can actually grow at least 3 crops a year, but even outside in your field you should be able to grow a minimum of 2. But in this greenhouse, this is our third crop of the year. These are all winter greens that were previously followed by tomatoes and cucumbers that we had growing up strings and growing vertically in this greenhouse. And here's a shot of what that looks like this summer. So only less than a month ago, this greenhouse was still filled with tomatoes and cucumbers that we were selling, and we just ripped them out and immediately amended these beds and replanted with my Jang seeder to all of the crops you see behind me, which includes spinach, arugula, Tokyo Bacana, salad mix, all crops that we talk about in that high profit crop list. So it's really that simple to grow that amount of food on that land base. If you continue to plant and grow at least 2 crops a year, that is how you're able to grow pretty big yields of food on a very small land base and sell big yields of food. So all you're doing is just continuing to flip every one of those 32 beds, if necessary, to a second crop, and rinse and repeat throughout the rest of your growing season to plant something that will mature in your season. It's as simple as that, to create 2 crops a year from 1 bed space. So if you focus on growing the high profit crops that I have listed at the link in the description below and plant them as densely as possible according to seed packets in these 32 beds, you should average about $400 per crop that matures in 60 to 80 days. So that's a spring crop. So for one example of that would be a bed of carrots. You plant 4 rows with a push seeder on a 50-foot bed, and you should average about 150 bunches, sometimes up to 200 bunches, and you should bring in about $450 in revenue from that one crop. And then you can immediately replant to another crop like arugula, spinach, or something like that in your season. And if you are growing a crop that takes 120 days in the ground, something like parsley, you don't necessarily need to flip that bed, because that crop will continue to produce your entire growing season and should give you huge yields according to that list. So for example, parsley should produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 bunches throughout that 120-day process and bring in a potential of $1,200 in revenue. So that bed doesn't need to be flipped, because it's producing food for you for a solid 3-month period. So if you do that for all 32 beds, you should bring in close to $25,560 in revenue if everything goes according to plan. Nothing ever goes according to plan in farming. So if you reach 20,000 on that space, you'll be doing really, really well. If you want to set something like this up in your backyard and you want my help, I've created an action plan to streamline the process of turning your backyard into a profitable veggie farm, and I'd love to share it with you. If that sounds like you, click the book a call link in the description below and book a time for us to chat. If you found this video handy, can you do me a favor and like this video and share it with somebody else who might find it valuable? It really helps me reach more people who want to learn how to farm. And if you want to go deeper down the backyard farming rabbit hole, watch this video.